Snow hides many things, suffering, kindness, even dignity. But sometimes, an act of quiet generosity echoes further than we can imagine. This is the story of Ethan, a single dad who stopped to help riders stranded in the snow. By morning, what the Hells Angels left in his mailbox would change everything. Before we start into today's story, let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And if our stories touch your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers and bring you more inspiring stories every week. The wind howled across the streets of Coldwater, a small mountain town buried under heavy snow. Ethan gripped the wheel of his rusted sedan. His 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, curled under a blanket in the passenger seat. The heater barely worked, but he promised her pancakes at home. As they turned a corner, Ethan spotted it. 3 motorcycles half buried in a snowdrift, their riders struggling against the storm. Leather vests, patches, exhaust fogging in the cold. Everyone else drove past, unwilling to stop. Sophie whispered, "Dad, should we help?" Ethan hesitated. He was late for work, his hands numb, his wallet nearly empty. But he saw the men straining in the snow and remembered what his late wife once said, "Kindness is the only wealth that grows when you give it away." He pulled over. The riders looked up, surprised, as Ethan trudged into the snow. "Need a hand?" he called, his breath clouding. In that moment, he wasn't thinking of reputation, of danger, or of fear, just of doing what was right. The wind cut across his face like knives as Ethan pushed against the fallen motorcycle with one of the riders. Their boots slipped on the ice, but slowly, the machine lifted upright. The rider grunted, nodding thanks. "Name's Razor," he said, his voice raspy. The patch on his vest read Hells Angels. Ethan nodded back, shivering. Together, they shoveled snow away with bare hands until the wheels were free. Sophie watched anxiously from the car, fogging the window with her breath. Another rider cursed loudly, frost clinging to his beard. "We'd be stuck here till spring without him." Ethan smiled faintly, brushing snow from his hair. His gloves were threadbare, his jacket too thin, but he pressed on until the last bike roared to life. The men clasped his shoulder roughly. "Appreciate it, brother." Ethan waved it off, heading back to Sophie. "Just glad you're safe." As he climbed into the car, he caught the stares of 2 locals across the street, mocking smirks, shaking their heads at him. One mouthed, "Biker lover." Ethan's stomach sank. In this town, kindness often looked like weakness. By evening, word spread. At the hardware store where Ethan worked part-time, customers whispered as he passed. One muttered, "He's desperate for friends." Another chuckled, "Helping criminals now, huh?" Ethan kept his head low, stacking salt bags, jaw tight. He could handle the insults, but Sophie overheard one of them at the counter. Her small face fell, confusion clouding her eyes. "Dad, why are they saying bad things?" she asked later, tugging at his coat. He forced a smile. "Because sometimes people don't understand kindness, sweetheart. But that doesn't make it wrong." Still, the words gnawed at him. He had done nothing but help stranded men in a storm, yet now he was treated as if he had betrayed his town. That night, snow piled against the windows, the house colder than usual. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, guilt and doubt gnawing. Had he done the right thing? Or had he just made life harder for Sophie? As sleep finally pulled at him, he couldn't know what the next morning would bring. The next morning, the town diner buzzed. Ethan brought Sophie for their usual Saturday breakfast, hoping routine would settle the unease. But the moment he stepped inside, the whispers returned. A group of men at the counter smirked, one sneering loudly, "Look, it's the biker babysitter." Laughter followed. Ethan's cheeks burned. Sophie squeezed his hand tighter, hiding behind him. Before he could respond, the bell above the door jingled. Heavy boots thudded against the floorboards. The diner grew silent. The Hells Angels walked in, 5 of them, leather vests dusted with snow, patches glaring under the fluorescent lights. Their presence sucked the air from the room. Conversations froze. Forks hovered in midair. Ethan's stomach dropped. Had they come for him? Would their presence only confirm the whispers? The leader scanned the diner, then fixed his gaze on the mocking men at the counter. Slowly, he walked forward, boots echoing like a gavel. The tension in the room coiled tight. The leader stopped behind the mocker, his shadow swallowing the man's reflection in the counter mirror. The bully's smirk faltered. "You got something to say about the man who helped us last night?" the leader asked, voice low but sharp. The diner froze. The man shifted nervously, trying to recover his bravado. Just joking. No harm." The angel leaned closer, his voice like gravel. "Mocking a father in front of his kid ain't a joke. You don't know cold until you're left alone in it. He pulled us out. He earned respect." The bully swallowed hard, his shoulders shrinking. Ethan's heart pounded, torn between fear and relief. Sophie peeked from behind him, wide-eyed, sensing the shift in the room. The angel straightened, turning slightly toward Ethan. Their eyes met for the first time, and Ethan saw something unexpected. Not threat, but gratitude. The mockery ended in silence. And though Ethan didn't yet know it, the true gift of thanks was waiting in the shadows of the coming night. The diner stayed frozen for a long moment after the confrontation. The bullies mumbled excuses and slipped out the door, their earlier smirks erased. Conversations cautiously resumed, but the tone had shifted. Ethan sat down with Sophie, his hands still trembling. She leaned close, whispering, "Dad, they stood up for us." He nodded faintly, heart pounding. Yes, they did. From across the diner, the angels settled into a booth. They didn't speak much, but their presence was like a wall, silent, unshakable. Every so often, their leader's gaze would flick to Ethan and Sophie, almost protective. Patty, the waitress, poured Ethan's coffee with a knowing look. "You did good, Han," she said quietly. Not everyone would have stopped in that storm. Ethan managed a small smile, but shame still pressed heavy. To him, it hadn't felt like courage. It had felt like stumbling into trouble. When he left the diner, the angels were still inside. But Ethan could feel their eyes on him as he carried Sophie back into the snow. It was the kind of watchfulness that carried a warning. You're not alone anymore. On Monday morning, Ethan dragged himself into the hardware store. His boots were wet from snow, his hands cracked from cold. He expected whispers, and he wasn't wrong. 2 co-workers leaned near the paint aisle, muttering, "Guess he thinks he's one of them now. Maybe he wants to ride with the angels. Look at him, walking proud after they scared off Pete." Ethan clenched his jaw. He hadn't asked for protection, hadn't asked for attention. All he'd done was stop his car in a storm. But the town had twisted it into something else: weakness, shame, betrayal. That evening, Sophie noticed his silence at dinner. "Dad, are you sad because people are mean?" He forced a tired smile. "Sometimes people don't understand. But what matters is we did the right thing." She nodded, her small face determined. "Then I'm proud of you." The words hit him harder than any insult. Still, as he tucked her into bed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the humiliation would only grow heavier. But the storm wasn't finished yet. Something unexpected was coming. The next evening, as snowflakes drifted under the street lamps, a low rumble shook the quiet neighborhood. Ethan peered out his frosted window and froze. Motorcycles. 3 of them idling outside his house. His chest tightened. Fear shot through him. What if the town was right? What if helping them had drawn danger to his doorstep? Sophie stirred on the couch, blinking. "Dad? Who's that?" Ethan pressed a finger to his lips, heart racing. Then came the knock, slow, deliberate. He opened the door just enough to see Razor, the rider from the storm. Snow clung to his beard, his leather vest dusted white. Relax, Razor said, his tone calmer than Ethan expected. We just wanted to thank you. Ethan swallowed, unsure what to say. It was nothing. Razor shook his head. To you, maybe. Not to us. He turned, climbing back onto his bike. Check your mailbox in the morning. The engines roared again, fading into the snowy night. Ethan shut the door slowly, unease prickling his skin. What could they possibly mean? Dawn broke pale and brittle. Ethan trudged through the snow to his mailbox, breath puffing in the freezing air. His stomach churned with unease. Inside sat a single envelope. No return address, just his name scrawled in rough handwriting. He carried it back inside, Sophie trailing behind curiously. His hands shook as he tore it open. A slip of paper fluttered out. A check. Ethan's breath caught. The amount written was more than he made in half a year. Enough to repair the house, pay overdue bills, even buy Sophie a proper winter coat. A note was tucked inside, brief and blunt. For the man who stood in the snow. For the father who didn't walk by. Respect. AFFA. Ethan's chest tightened, eyes burning. He had never asked for this. He had never dreamed of it. Sophie tilted her head, whispering, Dad, what is it? He pulled her close, voice breaking. It's a gift, sweetheart, from people who saw us. The shame of the town's whispers melted in that moment. In its place, dignity rose like fire in his chest. That night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the check and notes spread before him. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. He stared at the paper, heart caught between disbelief and gratitude. For years, life had been nothing but survival. Dead-end jobs, unpaid bills, the crushing loneliness since Sarah's passing. Every choice had felt like compromise, like falling short. And yet, strangers had seen his act of kindness and called it strength. They had written it in ink, backed it with something undeniable. Sophie padded into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. Dad, can we get a real coat now? Ethan laughed softly, tears sliding down his cheeks. Yes, sweetheart. And boots too. He folded the note carefully, tucking it into Sarah's old recipe book on the shelf. A place sacred, safe. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel mocked or weak or small. He felt respected. And respect, he realized, was worth more than any paycheck he'd ever earned. Ethan didn't want to hide. So the next Saturday, he took Sophie back to Coldwater Diner. The snow had eased, the town quieter under its frozen blanket. But as soon as they entered, he felt the eyes again. Pete, the loudest of the bullies, was at the counter with his buddies. Their voices lowered, smirks curling on their faces. Well, Pete muttered loudly enough for the room to hear. Looks like the biker's pet showed up again. A ripple of laughter followed. Ethan clenched his jaw, guiding Sophie to a booth. His stomach twisted. Part of him wanted to leave, but Sophie looked at him expectantly, waiting for pancakes. Patty, the waitress, shot him an apologetic look, setting down menus. Ignore them, she whispered, but ignoring humiliation never made it vanish. It only made it grow. As Pete's laughter filled the diner, Ethan felt his daughter's eyes on him. Was she seeing weakness, or would she see him hold his ground? The bell above the door jingled again. The cold air swept in, along with the low rumble of boots. The angels had returned. The diner hushed instantly as 5 angels walked in, snow melting from their leather vests. Razor was among them, his gaze sharp, protective. Pete stiffened but forced a laugh. What, you guys on babysitting duty again? The leader stopped dead in the middle of the diner, eyes locked on Pete. The silence stretched like a wire ready to snap. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. Sophie clutched his hand, whispering, Dad! The leader finally spoke, voice low and steady. Careful, boy. You're mocking a man who's worth 10 of you. He stood in the snow when the rest of you drove by. Pete swallowed hard, but his pride pushed back. So what? He's nothing. Just a broke single dad. The angel's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, the floor creaking under his boots. Then maybe you should ask yourself why a broke single dad carries more honor than you'll ever hold. The room stayed frozen, every breath heavy. For Ethan, it felt like the storm all over again, except this time he wasn't the one sinking. Ethan's heart pounded. Shame, anger, exhaustion. All the years of struggle boiled in his chest. He couldn't stay silent anymore. He stood, hands trembling but voice firm. Enough! The diner turned toward him. Pete smirked, ready for weakness. But Ethan's eyes were steady. You think being broke makes me less of a man? Ethan said, his voice rising. You think raising a daughter alone makes me weak? You mock me because it's easier than admitting you've never carried real weight in your life. The diner fell silent. Even the angels watched him closely. Ethan's throat tightened, but he pressed on. I may not have money. I may not have much at all. But my daughter sees me stand every day. She sees me fight through the cold, the bills, the loss. That's strength, not your cheap insults. Sophie's hand squeezed his, eyes wide with pride. Pete had no reply. His face burned, words caught in his throat. Ethan sat back down slowly, chest heaving but lighter. For once, he had spoken not from fear, but from dignity. The leader of the angels broke the silence. His voice carried like steel. That's the truth right there. That's what respect looks like. He turned his gaze on Pete, his tone colder now. Mock him again and you mock us, and you won't like where that road leads. Pete's smirk vanished. He muttered something under his breath, threw cash on the counter, and stormed out with his buddies trailing behind. The diner exhaled in relief. Conversations resumed in cautious murmurs, but the energy was changed. Razor walked over to Ethan's booth, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. Well said, brother. You didn't need us this time. You stood tall yourself. Ethan's chest swelled, not with arrogance, but with something deeper, ownership of his voice, his worth. Sophie leaned against him, whispering proudly, You sounded brave, Dad. Ethan kissed her hair softly. Bravery isn't about not being scared, sweetheart. It's about standing up anyway. The angels lingered long enough to finish their coffee, then rode out into the snowy streets, their engines echoing like thunder. That night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Sophie asleep upstairs. The envelope and check lay beside Sarah's locket, and for the first time, he felt no shame in looking at them. The town might still whisper, Pete might still sneer in dark corners, but Ethan's daughter had seen him stand tall. She had heard him speak his truth, and the angels, the men everyone feared, had shown him something he'd thought he lost. Dignity doesn't come from money, or status, or approval. It comes from how you carry the weight life gives you. Ethan whispered softly into the quiet kitchen, as if speaking to Sarah. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And Sophie's proud of me. The tears came, but they were clean. He tucked the note back into the recipe book, the check folded inside. Not as a trophy, not as a crutch, but as a reminder. In the coldest winter of his life, he had found warmth in the most unexpected place. And that warmth was enough to keep walking forward. A week later, another snowstorm rolled through Coldwater. Ethan trudged through the white drifts after work, his boots soaked, his body aching. As he passed his mailbox, he noticed something wedged inside again. Another envelope. His pulse quickened. He pulled it free, the cold stinging his fingers. Inside was no check this time, just a short note written in the same rough hand. Respect isn't given. It's earned. You earned it in snow, and again when you spoke your truth. Hold your head high. For her. For your daughter. AFFA. Ethan stood still in the storm, flakes clinging to his hair. A strange calm washed over him. He didn't need more money. He didn't need their protection. What he needed, what he had longed for, was recognition. That his fight, his quiet endurance, mattered. He tucked the note into his coat, heart warm despite the bitter cold. For the first time in years, the storm didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a companion, one he could walk through without fear. That evening, Sophie burst through the door after school, cheeks pink from the cold. She carried a drawing in her mittened hands. "Look, Dad," she said proudly, holding it up. It was a picture of the two of them, her with her toy truck, him standing tall beside her. Above them, she had drawn motorcycles with wings of fire. Ethan's chest tightened. "What's this?" She smiled brightly. "It's us. And them. You're brave, Dad. Like them." He knelt, hugging her tightly, tears pressing hot against his eyes. "No, sweetheart. I'm just me. But if you're proud of me, that's all I'll ever need." Her little arms squeezed around his neck. "I am. Always." Later, as he tucked her in, Sophie whispered sleepily, "Mom would be proud too." Ethan sat at her bedside long after she drifted off, her words echoing. For years, he had feared his daughter saw only his failures. But tonight, he realized, she saw his strength. And in her eyes, he was enough. The next day at work, the whispers continued, but Ethan no longer shrank from them. When Pete muttered something under his breath in the hardware aisle, Ethan met his eyes and simply said, "You don't get to define me." Pete faltered, for once left without a comeback. That night, Ethan and Sophie drove through the snowy streets in their old sedan. He hadn't even cashed the check yet. They passed the diner, its neon lights glowing through the frost. Ethan smiled faintly. Money could fix bills. A truck could make life easier. But what truly changed everything was invisible. His daughter's pride, the respect of strangers, and the dignity he had reclaimed. He realized Sarah had been right all along. Wealth wasn't measured in possessions. It was measured in the love you carried and the courage you showed when the world tried to strip it away. For the first time in years, Ethan felt rich. Weeks later, Ethan and Sophie were driving home when they spotted a familiar scene. A car stuck in a snowbank, its driver spinning tires uselessly. Ethan slowed, pulling over instinctively. Sophie looked at him, eyes wide. "Like you did with the riders?" He nodded. "Exactly." Together they pushed, slipped, and strained until the car rolled free. The grateful driver waved, thanking them over and over. As they climbed back into the car, Sophie grinned. "You're like them now, Dad. Helping people in storms." Ethan chuckled softly, heart full. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be stuck, and how much it means when someone stops." Snow swirled around them as they drove off, headlights cutting through the night. Ethan realized then, he didn't need the angel's presence to stand tall anymore. Their respect had planted something inside him. And now he carried it forward, not just for himself but for Sophie. Spring crept slowly into Coldwater, the snow melting into streams along the roadside. Ethan walked Sophie to school one morning, the sun finally warm on their faces. As they reached the gate, she squeezed his hand. "Dad, you know what?" He smiled. "What's that, bug?" "You're the bravest person I know." His throat tightened, but he managed a steady smile. "And you're the reason I can be." He watched her run inside, backpack bouncing, her laughter ringing out. For the first time since Sarah's passing, he didn't feel like a man barely surviving. He felt like a father who had kept his promise, to raise his daughter with love and dignity. Back home, he opened the mailbox one last time. Empty. But he smiled because he didn't need another envelope. The message had already been written on his heart. Respect, dignity, brotherhood. And as he stood in the morning light, Ethan whispered softly, "Thank you," because kindness had carried him into a storm, and the storm had carried him into strength. Sometimes the smallest kindness sparks the greatest respect. Ethan's story proves that dignity isn't bought. It's earned through love, courage, and standing tall in the storm. If the story touched you, subscribe, like, and press the bell icon. More powerful stories of resilience and truth are on the way.